Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that introduction. And wow, looking around this room, there are a lot of people here. In looking at you, I only recognize about 20% of your faces, and it's good to see you again. The other 80%, hello. But regardless of how well we may or may not know each other, we all have three things in common being in this room this afternoon. Number one, when you parked your car or golf cart out there on the parking lot, right under your feet was one of the treasures the Howards found in the mid 50s when they first started building this clubhouse. Number two, about 150 or 200 yards out there on the golf course, believed to be what is very possible an old Indian mound. It's right on our golf course. And number three, about half a mile from here, is a well, centuries old and probably 1,000-year-old Indian structure. And we'll cover all of those, but let me go over number one. What's under our feet? Well, when the Howards graded off to build the parking lot, they scraped open a very rich vein of amethyst. You could just walk through the parking lot and pick a beautiful purple quartz amethyst. Many of them were sent off and made into jewelry, and I'll show you that in a few minutes. But how do I have any status to stand here in front of you and cover the history of Sapphire Valley? I first found Sapphire Valley in the mid 70s. I was graduated college in 77. I knew I was going into the Marine Corps later that fall. And so I played tennis and I'm qualified for the American Express Challenger Circuit. Now that is to tennis players at the time what the Corn Ferry Tour is to golfers. And I qualified for it. And one stop was right here in Sapphire Valley. They put us up for a week. I had a big time. And I told myself when I got out of the Corps, whether it was 3 years or 30 years, I was coming back to Sapphire Valley. The After 3 years, there was a reduction in force across all the armed forces. And so I thought, I've served my country. I'm proud of that, but I'm going to go back to Sapphire. So the second week in December, I moved back to Sapphire Valley, and I was coming down Cherokee Trail out there, and I was looking for somebody. I had an interview with resort management, and I saw this beautiful young lady standing by her car at the bottom of the ski area, and I went over to ask her, told her what I was looking for, and she told me where to go, and I had no idea that I had just met one of the granddaughters of the founder of Sapphire Valley. Now, she was cute. I just thought she really spelled her last name funny. But I'm there as a Marine Corps officer, just off active duty, beautiful Sapphire Valley, beautiful ski instructor, except this place has potential. And it did. A couple of years later, we got married. And I have been proud to be part of the Howard family as well as associated with this club for 44 years. But once I got into the family, what I discovered is that both Lisa's granddad and dad were pack rats, and I'm grateful for it. As an example, in the 1920s, Gene Howard Sr. was in his 20s, and he formed a company called Georgia Hardwood. And ladies and gentlemen, this binder records the price of hardwood that he was tracking dating back to 1923. This binder is 103 years old. But Gene Howard Jr., who went to Georgetown Prep for high school and was a very good golfer, uh, was getting ready to go to college, and he actually received a scholarship offer from the University of Florida. So from 1952, Gene kept his offer from the University of Florida. Now, of course, having played for Georgetown Prep, I mean, he had to play for the university, or the Jesuits would probably put a curse on him. So what we're going to talk about. I wanted you to see an overall timeline of Sapphire Valley and what was happening in Western North Carolina at the time. I am going to take you back about probably 1,000+ years and discuss the Indian artifact across the street. But then we're going to focus on this area. And the understanding of history in Sapphire Valley today, we must build a foundation dating back to the 1880s from Asheville through Brevard and up into our part of Western North Carolina. Did anybody see this movie? It was about 10 days ago up at the Village Green. Yeah, but there was a crowd there, wasn't there? In fact, I think we were way over capacity in the Lewis Hall up at the Village Green. This is a great movie dealing with the, as it says, rise, ruin, and the restoration of Lake Toxway. And if you haven't seen it, they're replaying this in this September, I think, up at the up in Highlands, and it's part of the Highlands Cashers Film Festival. I highly recommend you look that up and go see it if you can. Okay, from time to time, this is kind of meant to be interactive. And so when this question mark pops up, I'm going to ask you guys a question. So who knows what this building is? Oldest building in Sapphire Valley. Right, yeah, it's a library. But before it was a library, the country club's own Joyce Davis operated Fairfield House Antiques out of this building in the 70s. And Skip, did you work for it, right? 10 years, yeah. But today, indeed, it is the library restaurant. A quick story. Lisa and I were walking this morning about 11 o'clock, and we're heading back to our rental and passed in front of the library. And everybody knows Chef Johannes, right? Yeah. Chef Johannes has got his Farmer John clothes on. He's out rooting around in his garden. He's got a purveyor rep there from, I think it was Buckhead Steak and Seafood. And he's talking up a storm. We can hear him talking about mushrooms and tomatoes and all that. And we yell up to Chef, say hello, and he turns around and says, hello, how are you? What are you doing in Sapphire Valley? And I said, well, Chef, I'm doing a presentation tonight on the history of Sapphire Valley, and your building is part of it. Oh, full disclosure, he knows I love his venison chili. I get it all the time when I can. So he said, oh, wait. He runs inside and he brings me a quart of frozen venison chili. And it has a little plain label on it. It says venison chili and has the date he made on it. I said, Chef, I'm going to give you a shout out of your chili in my presentation tonight, this afternoon. He said, oh, no, wait. You did a better label. I better label. Wait. He runs inside and he runs back out and he brings me this. I mean, you got to love Chef and Liz. Oh, they're assets to our valley, and we're very grateful to have them. So what was happening around here in the early 1800s? Not much. Everyone had known for decades that there was gold and precious stones on all the creeks around here, and just individual panning was individual basis. But by the mid 1800s, Georgetown Mine was created on what today is Camp Marywood, and this is long before the lake was created. And it was so profitable pulling gold and stones out of here that Tiffany's set up shop over at Georgetown Mine and sent quite a bit of wealth back up to New York City. As in 1981, the lake was drained to repair the dam at the other end, and sluice boxes just like this, when they drained it, sluice boxes just like that were still standing on the lake bed. And this was been about 30 or 40 yards out in front of where the Camp Marywood docks are today. This was also a period of isolated local logging. If you wanted something built, you're going to cut and get the lumber milled yourself somewhere. And actually, there was a sawmill up in Cassers operated by the Zachary family. And I bet Ashton's next paycheck there that the wood that went into the library building was probably maybe cut here in the valley, but taken up to the Zachary mill to be cut. Well, High Hampton also had a mill. But the rise of commercial timber business occurred in 1880 when the Western North Carolina Railroad made it up to Brevard. Now, northern industrialists had already stripped the Northeast Allegheny Mountains, others of most of the good timber, and they sent their timber cruisers south, and these were scouts, and they started identifying the Great Smokies and the Southern Appalachians as prime areas for lumber. And what happened, they began almost clear cutting everything from Asheville toward Brevard. It got so bad with the loss of soil and and erosion that the government stepped in with one of his first conservation efforts and created the Pisgah National Forest. In fact, as industrialists were making money in the north, they were also making a mess. This is an 1880s cartoon just showing just how dirty the air was in New York at the time. Also, in the late 1800s, Asheville had air so exceptionally clean, crisp, and free of pollution that physicians nationwide were often prescribing Asheville as a cure for respiratory diseases. And now that the railroad was here, thousands of tuberculosis and pulmonary patients from northern cities could escape to Asheville and breathe its clean mountain air. Also, with the railroad in 1888, the turning point for Sapphire and all of western North Carolina occurred when George Vanderbilt constructed the Biltmore House and began a permanent shift to an elite playground. This is known as the Vanderbilt effect. In fact, when he arrived in 1888, he started purchasing up to 125,000 acres using 700 different contracts. And he used different names and aliases so he wouldn't tip off that Vanderbilt was buying up all the property. And kudos to him because he established the first forestry school on Biltmore Estate to try to replant and reforest. Sorry about that. His intention was to reforest, again, Asheville and the Brevard area. Of course, with Vanderbilt endorsing Western North Carolina for investment, the Lake Toxaway Company was founded, and they immediately created several inns. The top left is the Franklin Hotel in Brevard. If you come up on the train, there was a depot in Brevard by this time. You would have probably stayed here for the night, and the next day, horse and buggy would have taken you up to the bottom left picture is the Toxaway Inn on Toxaway Lake. You might have gone further to the bottom right. That is the Sapphire Inn on Sapphire Lake. Does anybody live on Whisper Lake? Whisper Lake is where the Sapphire Inn was. And when I first came here in the 80s, early 80s, the foundations of that inn were still there. It actually burned, I think, in the 30s. And of course, top right, you would have been, as Amelia said, you would have been at Fairfield in one day, horse and buggy back maybe to Toxaway in the next. This is a great picture, postcard. Let me read it to you so you won't turn your head too far. It says, "Hello, Helen. We're here yesterday and at Toxaway today. We're having a fine time, Amelia." And this image is taken from the Stone Basin, which is advertised as healing waters. In 1903, the railroad made it to Toxaway, and they had 4 trains per day arriving, bringing guests and taking guests back. And there's so many Pullman cars that the elite used, as names you see there. But in addition, Thomas Edison, probably J.P. Morgan, Henry Ford, Harry Firestone were all coming up in their private cars, and there were so many of them, they had to build a special parking lot for them on the side of the depot, so the regular train could run back and forth, and the Pullmans would be parked off to the side. Just beautiful. These were called private varnish back in the days. Many had fireplaces, full bathrooms, and bedrooms. This is the 1903 image of our valley. Of course, this area is hilltop. This area is Round Hill. And this is our golf course back here. Now, does anybody know what hole that hill may be on? No, what I did, I was able to do a Google overlay, and that is almost precisely where the 11th tee is, that par 3 that kind of comes back toward the clubhouse. Now, this also, documentation I read from the owners of the property in the 40s found a lot of Indian artifacts out here. And they believe that this was an old Indian mound, and it makes some sense because the whole valley's around it. Why is this mound in the middle of the valley? I'm not saying Ashton we start excavating the 11th tee, but I think we need to do more research on that. Of course, this 1897 plat of the inn, again, this is now Hilltop, but I want to bring your attention to this and the labels on this. From left to right, there's servants' quarters, ice house, and a power station. Now, back in the day, the Fairfield Lake used to freeze over solid, probably up to a foot in the shallow areas, and staff would cut large blocks of ice up, bring them up to the ice house. They would also pack the basement of the inn with straw for the season and bring larger blocks of ice up, store them in the inn to be used the next season for refrigeration. And this is very interesting. This area took me a long time to figure out what that said. It's Salutis, which is Latin for spring of health. And this is also the stone basin. Okay, let's look at the stone basin. Again, advertised as spring of health in 1896. It's just a few steps from where the inn was. The Howard family called this a wishing well. And back in the day, in the 80s when I was here, we walked down from the bar at the inn, sit around there and have a adult beverage. But when 2014, when we started cleaning this up, I saw something else, and it has to do with the alignment. I was actually able to meet with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians about this, and he agreed it's very old, probably either religious, some sort of ceremony, and quite possibly because of its alignment, dealing with the solar system or astronomy. And what's happening here, water's coming in from a branch, a little creek right up here. It comes in this slot. You see how that, just a perfect mirror there, because the water is going out slow enough not to ripple, and then it heads out this little channel. And here's the special alignment. This thing is just not random. It's actually pointing true north, not magnetic north, but true north. And so if it's not related to the sun or the astronomy, why is it oriented true north? This is how we found it in 2014 or rediscovered it. I don't think I've changed that much, have I? Another view of the basin, cleaned up. Another view, I want to show the basin, just how reflective that little basin is. And this particular one, this is just perfectly reflective. And keep in mind, this is just part of the water. More water from the creek or the stream is actually coming around the basin, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I want you to see these ripples. These ripples are caused by the granite underneath them. Now, it would take a long time for water to wear down solid granite where it would actually cause those ripples. In 2014, I think late April, members of the Historical Society and family members, we gathered down and did a video exploration. And let's take a look at that video. It'll take a minute for the camera to focus. Here we go. What I want you to do is look how this is constructed. It chiseled perfectly out where no water is leaking, continues down the channel. There's only two solid boulders on top. They're chiseled perfectly. And keep in mind, this is 3 or 4 feet underground. Only some of the finest roots could get through. If you see down here, this is going to be the end. And when I get to the end, I turn the camera to the right, but there's more water actually coming around from the left through this area and out. And again, I'll turn the camera in just a second. Oh, and when I do turn the camera, we actually find another very significant artifact. All right, the camera's been turned. Excuse me. Camera's been turned. I got to pull it back a little bit. What I want you to look for in this area, once it comes back, It's how much more water is flowing out of this thing. And this is a fairly large cave. I'm not sure how big it is. But here comes our other historic artifact right in this right corner. You can see all the water flowing down through there. See it? But yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is another historic artifact. This is the style of can that Miller Brewing Company launched Miller Lite. So that I consider to be very historic. See the water flow. Now, this is how we intended to leave the basin back in 2014. It does not look like this today, I'm sad to say. But we intended to work with the Sapphire Valley Garden Club. There was one at the time. We were going to, clean it up, put walking paths in, plant flowers, label the flowers. And even when before it was clean, but not this nice, there were actually a couple of weddings down there. We'll talk about more about that at the end of this presentation. Well, the end of the Gilded Age came in starting in July of 1916. A series of storms dumped quite a bit of water in western North Carolina, dumping more water in one day than had ever been recorded in history in the United States. Much like Helene a couple of years ago, catastrophic flooding. It washed railroads away, washed bridges away, homes. It was bad. At the time, though, at that storm, Lake Toxaway had survived. It was full to the brim. But a couple of weeks later, August 13th of 1916 at 7:10 p.m., with another 24 inches of rain arriving in 24 hours, Lake Toxaway Dam gave way. They estimate that over 5 trillion gallons of water rushed out. And so you take the inn received power from turbines down at the dam. So with no dam, no power, the inn went dark, no recreation, the lake is gone, and all the guests pretty much got in the buggies and went back over to the train station and they left. And Sapphire was now separated from the Lake Toxaway Company. So what happened to our valley? When it burst, E.H. Jennings, the largest shareholder, purchased over 27,000 acres from the company, including where we are today, Sapphire Valley and Lonesome Valley. For the next 3 decades, friends and family of the Jennings estate came up, enjoyed the inn, some coming every year for 10, 12 years, staying a month, maybe 2, and us enjoying the cool air. And I was actually working for the Jennings family, for Dick Jennings, doing some technology work at Canyon Kitchen, and I found this painting hanging in a closet over at Lonesome Valley. So in 1946, I call this New Money makes one of the last big purchases directly from the Jennings estate. Tatum Wofford, whose parents had built the Breakers Hotel back in 1917, I think, had built the Tatum Hotel on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach. It was very successful. He built that in the 30s, and that success, he envisioned a sky club up in the mountains, cool mountains of western North Carolina, where the elite could fly in, enjoy the cool mountain air, stay at the inn. And he had big plans. This article from Silver Herald in '48 shows it had been renamed to the Tatum Sky Club. He had plans for an 18-hole golf course, ice skating rink, and other facilities. But none of that happened, as I believe what occurred, that he overextended himself. And by the early 1950s, the Sky Club had become more of a gentleman's club. If you catch my meaning, perhaps a bit of a red light district. And now the golden age of Sapphire Valley begins. The Howards, seniors now retired, have been living in Highlands for some years, but they wanted to create a club for their family and friends out of Augusta and Palm Beach to come up and enjoy what they were. And this is out of the archives from the Howard basement over here. Is a deed from 1954 purchase of the property. Now initially, the Howards did not buy the inn. They just bought enough property to the golf course, but realizing they were going to need uh, a place for immediate occupancy so their friends could come up. They bought the inn, and he did this because he had been driving down 64 for some years, seeing the valley on the right hand side, and then he got word that the Sky Club was failing, and they made a purchase. Now this to me this is a mess. This is how Tatum left the club. I mean, how Tatum left the inn, all gray, no color trim on the windows. Looks like deferred maintenance. When I first saw this picture, I said, "Well, Mr. Howard is standing there thinking, what the heck have I bought?" But Lisa probably has it right. She says, look what we bought. He's standing there looking at Baldy, looking at the beautiful lake, knowing they had a beautiful resort in the making. Of course, Miss Katie, Mimi, as we call her, Miss Jean Senior, uh, had the inn painted this color. What this is, she found a pale green color she liked on the moss that was growing on the trees down near the lake, and they took that moss, took it down to a manufacturer in South Carolina, and had paint to match it, and painted it this color. Of course, work on the golf course started immediately with earth shaping. Of course, this picture is out there in the hallway, but left to right there is Gene Senior, I think Jim McDevitt, and Jim was actually the first manager of the Sapphire Inn. And the next is Mr. Neagley. I think the next guy is Mr. Hought. And of course, Gene Jr. on the right. Now, who can tell me what hole they're working on there? No, I don't know. It's not 11. Let's take a look. Here comes some magic. Yep, 17. I don't think that green's that big anymore. Keep making them smaller. Of course, the driving range continued to operate as a landing strip to land and get taken over to either up to the club or over to the inn. And that continued into the mid 60s, late 60s, when a plane topped the trees right outside this building, clipped them, and landed up belly up over here on the 18th fairway. And that was kind of the end of that. Which is our clubhouse at the time. I want to take note of a couple of things. Notice the windsock with the airstrip. Notice these round windows. This is designed by famed architect Byron Simonson, and he generally had something round in all of his designs. Notice these are the green and white umbrellas, almost identical to the ones that were in use at Augusta National. Mr. Howard being a member of Augusta National at the time. Who can tell me who designed our golf course? Yep, George Cobb. And see, Mr. Howard met George Cobb because he designed the par 3 at Augusta National. Now another course, yeah, we actually built the course down at Conisty Falls too, down in Brevard. But important to me, the War Department actually had George Cobb design the golf courses at Marine Corps Base Camp Lejeune, and I was stationed at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point. And just remember those windows, we'll see them again. There's some advertising they were using at the time. And I talked to Gene one day about this 12,000 acre mountain resort, and he said, well, they believe they pretty much counted like the vertical service on Baldy and all the vertical square footage acreage that existed on all the mountains. Here's some more marketing material they created. And this is the founding document for the Sapphire Valley Golf Club. course, $1,500 initiation fee, $300 annual fee, and a social membership of only $100. Pretty sweet deal. Now, the Howards wanted to provide some larger accommodations for those staying over at the inn. They built, I think, 9 of these cottages just up from the inn. These are located on that hilltop loop. Today, these cottages, where these were occupied by those brownstone cottages. Now, the Howards, Gene Jr. and family were living on developing and managing the resort. And after several trips over to Cataloochee ski area, Gene realized that Sapphire Valley could support skiing. So in '64, Gene did a test snowmaking on this hill to see if it was feasible, and it was. So he began construction of Ski Sapphire Valley, which opened in 1966. Where there's the double chairlift going in, and there's the motor for the chairlift. You can see that green, pale green color on the end. This was a second oldest farmhouse at the time. They're assembling some double chairs. You can see the snowmaking system going in the pipes. And this was actually used as a ski lodge when the ski area opened. I love these old Palm Beach Life ads. They're crisp, black and white, just really, I love them. Cool ads. But I'm showing you this because of that. To create the perfect alpine experience, Howards actually hired 2 Austrian ski instructors for Ski Sapphire Valley. Their names were Hans and Dieter, right? Of course, Hans and Dieter. No, not only were they good skiers, but they also, of course, could sing and play the guitar. So they entertained guests at night in the inn, but also generally almost lived with the Howards while they were here. And just I know the Vordock zip line that exists today over the ski area is named in kind of memory of the Austrian ski instructor, because Vordock is Austrian for canopy. And to complete the experience on the slopes, the old farmhouse, now a ski lodge, was also decked out with checkered tablecloths, fondue, and hot chocolate, and wine being served daily. And lively Austrian music played in the lodge as well as on the slopes. Now, golf club estates and round hill estates were going well, but the Howards wanted to provide another option close to the golf club and close to the ski area. So golf club apartments were built. It's also designed by Byron Simons. And does anybody live in one of these? Yeah, hey, John Clements, yes, sir. Yeah. And these were advertised as a good investment because if you weren't using your unit, they would be rented through the inn, maid service available. Check this out. This was the original density they had planned for the apartment. I think John lives pretty much right down in here. Clubs over here. There was 57 total apartments going to be built. Of course, today this is all the Fairway Hamlets. Anybody live in the Hamlets? Okay, yes, sir. And this is very much close, because Gene always wanted to have what he called a water feature. You had to have a water feature. That's pretty much where that large hamlet pond is today. Of course, I talked about when I started the presentation that Mr. Howard had formed a Georgia Hardwood Company. Later, he would team up with a friend, Owen Cheatham, and that company went on to become Georgia Pacific. What happened in the early parts of the war, the Army was having a hard time getting enough lumber to build crates for shipping as well as build overseas bases. And so Gene developed a co-op pulling about, I think, a dozen lumber yards together that had to commit. If they got an order from the Army, they would fulfill that order within 24 hours, have it on a train, and head it to a port. And that was very successful. In fact, Gene had his own office in the War Department. This was before the Pentagon was built. but they were all scattered in downtown Washington, and he had his own office. But again, he stayed close to the Army, and the Army reached out to him. They saw Sapphire Valley as being very similar to the terrain and the winds and so forth they were experiencing in Vietnam as that was escalating. So we offered up all of Sapphire Valley for them to come up and train. Sikorsky had one of their newer helicopters. They brought it into training with the Army. It's some operations on Fairfield Lake. And to me, this is amazing. This helicopter is not floating. Hang on, my pointer. He's actually, you see by the rotor wash, he's hovering, if you call it hovering, and doing some operations there on the water. This is a helicopter over at the country club at this time, the golf club. See, that's so large. It's amazing how big that is. You know, it seems like each generation has a different Florida connection. You know, back in these days with the Howards in Augusta and having a house in Palm Beach, it was kind of the Palm Beach connection. When Lisa and I were here in the 70s, 80s, it seemed like it was in Naples with Roy Ponciana Club, Fort Myers with the Fiddlesticks Club. And today it seems like it's a Tampa St. Pete connection. You guys laughing? Am I right? Yeah, Tampa St. Pete. But back in the Palm Beach days, a gentleman by the name of Emil Schmidt, he was on the original member on the Board of Governors, and they were good friends. He actually catered to the ultra wealthy in Palm Beach with high-end 20th century antique silver, jewelry, and he actually owned several stores and shops on Worth Avenue. So Miss Howard actually gave him some amethyst to turn into some rings for him, and that's one of them. Really pretty, a couple of diamonds on each side. Great carving work on the silver. So in 71, and of course I found the contract over in the archives. In 71, the Howard sold the resort. I asked Gene why, and I'm showing these pictures again because of this gravel roads. As High Hampton was expanding and other clubs up in Highlands were expanding, they all had to have paved roads and additional water systems and a sewer system. And you know, at the time Gene was busy. Gene and Marty were busy raising a family, and they just did not want to go through that expense. So the resort was sold, the club was sold, and it had a contract in it for a right of first refusal, and that's important. So Certainty came in and immediately started building project. First two were the hilltop on the left and the woods on the right. If I didn't mention it, they also in the same year built Conisty Falls down in Brevard. Here's some marketing material they used in the summer of 74 rather. Some more marketing material. This is a very important picture. Eddie Albert was not only hired to be a spokesman, he was also named Vice President of Environmental Control, and he was able to review all the projects that Certainty were going to get involved in. And what this video is, this in the middle here is my sister-in-law, Catherine. She had written a song called Take Me to the Mountains. So Eddie Albert came up to do a video shoot. And this is in Miss Howard Sr.'s house at the time. This is the Howell residence now. And this little thing getting squeezed out is my sister-in-law, Lauren Howard, and she is here tonight. Thanks for coming, sister-in-law. And this one over here, falling over with laughter, is Mara Howard Burton. And she is here tonight. And thank you guys for coming. Now, I've shown you the three of the four Howard sisters. And this next picture is very important. To me, probably the most significant. If you remember, I told you when I first came up to Sapphire and met Lisa, and she was a ski instructor. Well, the rest of that story is I actually had an interview to become the assistant manager and night operations manager at the ski area, and I got the job. So for the next couple of years, uh, we worked at the ski area. We just had a ball. And so this picture, that's my beautiful ski instructor executing a perfect spread eagle off the top of the ski slopes on the advanced slope. And no, she is not sitting on an icicle. She made a perfect landing and shushed on down the mountain. Some more marketing material that Realtek was using at the time. We actually had our own stables right over here across from Lonesome Valley back then. I'm showing you this picture also for one other reason. And right there, Sapphire Valley had a library lounge in the back corner of the bar, back corner of the inn. And today's own library is named in honor of that lounge. Of course, in '73, fire destroys the clubhouse at the time. For those windows I told you to remember, right? Of course, on the right, this is Marty and Gene Howard, and they don't look too worried, do they? Because they had sold the club. On the left are some lifelong friends. That's Bruz and Kitty Boardman from Augusta, Georgia. This is the clubhouse that Realtek and Certainty built for us. I love this clubhouse. It was my favorite. I spent more time in that one than I have in this. And I was kind of sad to see it go, but there was no way this clubhouse would support the membership we have today. So it was the right thing to do. Beautiful clubhouse. I believe the paneling was inside was actually wormy chestnut. So all's going well. '74. This is they did a monthly newsletter, and this is a picture of the winners of what would become the Gene Howard Memorial. And this is Charlie Brown. That is Red Howard, Howard. Red was in the clothing business. He came up as an original member to operate the pro shop. That's Jim McDivitt. And this in the middle is, again, my sister-in-law, Lauren, and Ashton. My God, take a look at this. They were giving some serious silver away. Wow. No, on the right, the structure of the club at the time, the actual officers of the club were all Realtek executives. But the board of governors, there were 12 at the time. And this is really the who's who of the original members of Sapphire Valley. So if all was going great, what happened? Excuse me. Well, in December of 1976, everyone got this letter, property owners and club members. Let me zoom in on that. A new company is formed. Well, the problem is, that ignored the right of first refusal. In fact, Realtek said, no, we didn't sell it. We're just going to spin it off with a sub. And that's really their own press release shows that not to be true. So this package, and this is the original folder containing all the lawsuit material. And in it, there are many letters from Mr. Howard Jr. to Myron Simons, the general counsel of Certainty. But in January of '77, the club members discussed efforts to buy the club from Realtek for $2 million, but they stand down in lieu of a pending lawsuit. Now, I want to read something to you. This is one of the final letters Gene sent. Mr. Simons, I personally regret the direction in which this situation is taken. I have a responsibility to my family and to the homeowners. All we have asked for is the exercise our right to buy the golf club and golf course under the agreement of April 2nd, 1971. Again, all we want is the acknowledgement of our right to purchase that small portion of the valley that is so vital to our property and our way of life there. We are not asking for you to give it to us. We want to buy it. By the same token, we are not lambs. We don't want to have our rights denied for the expediency of a sale. We don't want to have our property value eroded. I can assure you that will not happen and not be done at my expense nor that of the people I represent. So game on. A few days later, Gene has to file a lawsuit in U.S. District Court. It didn't take long for the courts to agree. Instead of a full trial, they issued a consent order for Certainty to work with the Howards and the members to buy the club. Negotiations go on for another year. Mr. Clay Davis makes an offer for $1.2 million, and Certainty refuses. Certainty didn't want to just carve out and sell the club and the golf course. They wanted to sell all the property of Sapphire Valley. Another year goes by, and the court-ordered negotiations end with agreement to sell the entire resort to Fairfield Communities, maintaining Gene's right and the members' right of first refusal, as well as a 3-year commitment, a management commitment. Fairfield wanted to maintain and manage the club for 3 years to allow them to get their feet on the ground and to finish building out Holly Forest Golf Course across the street. So at this time, Fairfield Community comes in. They're the 3rd largest vacation ownership in the United States. And at its peak, they had over 33 resorts under the Sunburst logo. And they started building, of course, they built the timeshare first, which would be Fox Hunt Villas, Fairway Forest, Mount Laurel. They built Country Club Estates right over here, Country Club Villas down below us here, Emerald Cove, Emerald Ridge, Emerald Crest. Many others. I'm going back to this picture because it's in the off season for me was the summer when I wasn't working the ski area. I actually worked for Fairfield, and I was the food and beverage purchasing manager. In fact, then it was very dry. And so here at the club, those may remember, of course, at the time, that clubhouse at the time was flipped. The golf pro shop is over here to my right. Kitchen was over here to the left. And going down toward the pro shop, we had a series of liquor lockers, which worked out great. We had our bottles in there with our names on them. But see, Fairfield was bringing thousands of people in a month, and they wanted to have a full bar experience. So they also thought they could get by with saying any guest of Fairfield on the property was part of our private club or their private club. And that worked for a little while. They got many citations, but they probably paid off the liquor people. And but they did not want to have their liquor confiscated. So back in this kitchen, if you can imagine, walk in, there's a huge set of shelves, probably 6 feet wide, 6 feet high, full of canned goods and spices. But if you reached up about head high and flipped this lever, those set of shelves was actually a big door and would slide open, and it would reveal just a room full of liquor. Our staff had to go in there all the time to pull bottles out for guests. They did not want to store liquor over at the inn. So what they did, they came back over to the ski area. They created a couple of rooms back in the ski patrol area, put an alarm system on it, and there must have been 1,000 bottles in the old ski area. So at the end of the 3-year period, it came time. Gene and the members approached Fairfield, said it's time to buy. They were ready to execute. Well, at first they didn't want to sell it. They were having a big time bringing their timeshare people running through the club and being able to offer a nice flat golf course and then a mountainous course across the street. Well, Gene reminded them that he would do what it took to protect the interests of the members. So they relented. And so the Sapphire Valley Development Corporation helped the members with this creation document, $4 million purchase price. And of course, Gene still had some property to sell, so he negotiated a special Howard membership. Actually, you think there's still some $7,500 membership available? That'd be a deal, wouldn't it? I'm showing this picture because the Sapphire Valley Realty and Development Corporation had a staff member. His name was Jim Ryan, and he wrote a wonderful 7-page document on the history of Sapphire Valley, almost dating back to the beginning of time, through the late 70s. And I'll have this on the historical website very soon. But I mention that because his son is here, and it's everyone's favorite Bazaar Barn manager, Skip Ryan. Thanks for coming, Skip. Okay, what happened to our inn? Well, what we now know is that in the early 80s, Fairfield communities began to have financial trouble. They had already built the river run over here as their hotel concept. So by like 83, 84, they turned the inn into employee housing. Maintenance went down. And finally, in 1986, they tore it down. I can tell you where this inn is, where they buried it. If you go through Camp Marywood down the gravel road and you enter Camp Marywood's gate, there are two rock columns there. Just to the right of that, you'll see a nice big flat field, probably soccer field. The inn is buried right there. I saw it happen. And for months, if not a year, one of these metal fire escape ladders was sticking out of the ground, out of the mud right there. Okay, who's joined the club since this date, since June of 2017? Okay, several, yeah. Well, that was a bad night. I actually found Johan Luki standing out here on the driving range. We talked a minute about what was happening. I made it around back to the croquet court, found some other members back there. We were all way too close to it, but of course, this is the culprit. That golf cart knocking over the tanks and they exploded. You can see this one blew apart at its seam. You notice back here was damage to the wall. But I would say, I think this is the club's finest hour with Ashton at the helm, with Ashton, the staff at the time, board members. We still had a good summer. I remember back here on the driving range, we had a huge July 4th under several big tents, good food, good music. We still had a good time. And now I need your help. In 2014, when I started the society, I actually met with Ann McKee Austin. She is the founder of the Cassius Historical Society, and I wanted to get her okay on Sapphire having there, and she was very supportive. It was important to me that she supported that. So at the time we had a board, we were doing it right, cleaned up the basin, but over time we had some staff members move. I got another job, and so the society has gone dormant. What I really hope comes out of this is that a group of you in this room help me restart the society. We have another 23 years to document. Let's work with Camp Marywood, get that basin rebuilt, maybe perhaps as a garden club component out of it, but I think we can do a lot of good with restarting the society. But if that doesn't happen, just like this presentation, the society and the maintenance of Sapphire history is over. Thank you.